Hello and welcome to this Overpower3D.com review. Today we are reviewing Chivalry Medieval Warfare. It is a team-based, although it can be 1 versus 1, medieval combat game. And we're going to just jump into a server. You can go on 1 versus 1 duel servers or a big team battle server. Generally, you will be playing on one of 2 teams, which are the Mason Order and the Agatha Knights. They are blue and red teams, so it's quite easy to tell who is an enemy unless they're covered in blood, which can make it a little tricky to work out. Generally, it is a very visceral feeling game. The one thing you really have to watch out for is I cannot recommend this game if you have a very poor internet connection. Because while there is an offline mode, the AI is very stupid. And online really is the only way to play. As you can see, we have 4 classes. I'm going to start out with the Archer. With all classes, you get a primary weapon, a secondary weapon, and a special, which can be something like a shield, or in this case, when I'm choosing a bow, I get a choice of arrows. Of course, one arrow pierces armor better than the other, and one does more damage to lightly armored foes. We're starting out here not in the battle because we have joined midway through, so we're just spectating until the next round begins, and then we'll be able to jump in. So yes, as you make kills, you unlock new weapons. There aren't a huge number of weapons in each tree, but they don't really need to be, because each weapon can be used in a variety of different ways. The biggest thing about this combat system is that you have 3 different kinds of attacks. You have a standard slash, which is a sideways slash. You have a stab, which you just saw that man of arms use there, which is when you thrust your sword forward, that has the longest reach. And then you also have an overhead slash. Ah, here we go, we're in the battle. I'm using a short bow, which has fast speed, but it doesn't do as much damage, and of course doesn't have as much range. You can see that you have a crosshair, so you have some aiming assistance. However, it is very much skill-based and very timing-based as well. Unless you're using a shield, which has various disadvantages, you generally, even if you hold the button down, you will be doing timed block. And it's really important that you mention that. Oh, and I got knocked off and died. That's what happens. Generally, you die fairly quickly. I was playing an archer, and archers are very lightly armored. You can see there, that is a knight. Each class plays really differently, each class plays really differently depending on which weapon. And it may not look like you have a great choice of weapons, as you can see there, you do have a few, and if you mix and match them correctly, you can have a very diverse loadout. Now, the archer is of course the most lightly armored. Man of arms is very quick, but a melee character. The Vanguard is sort of a general, he's medium armoured and he's relatively speedy as well, so he's a bit of a nice general basic character. The Knight is very heavily armoured and very slow. We are going in now as a Vanguard. You can see we're using the Claymore. And as you can see here, even if I hold down the button, it is a time block. It is always exactly the same length of time that the sword will be blocking for. There are some glitches, like jumping on that terrain, but generally it's pretty good in terms of keeping the game working, with the exception of lag, because the server has a very high ping. I have not had any problems with. And as you can see right here, it's generally quite a fair fight if you're going up against a single opponent. However, when you get groups teaming up and you can have several people against one opponent, it can be very difficult to beat multiple opponents at once. As you see here, I attempted to do a stab and got smashed in the face. blocking and timing is very important because you do, even as a knight, you don't have a lot of health. You can take maybe 5 hits as a knight, and then it of course depends. As you can see here, it is possible to do a lot of damage to a knight, even if you're an archer, the least heavily armored class, just using your dagger. So it is very much a skill-based game. There are no flat-out upgrades, only side grades. For example, I'm using a claymore, but I could also use a simple two-handed sword. And then, of course, later on, I might unlock the spy handler. These are all two-handed swords for the Vanguard. They all have the same 3 stats of damage, speed, and reach. And instead of upgrading them, they side grade. They just, one of them increases, but one of them will also decrease. So you can adjust for different playstyles. For example, with this claymore, it's slightly faster, and I believe does very slightly more damage, but it has less reach. So I want to be doing less stabbing with this weapon, but I can do more overhead swings and sideways swings. And as you can see, having 2 of this going against that one guy meant I was able to get it because one, and that was a time block, really important to do. If you are defending, you can only defend in front of you really, because you only have a certain blocking area. If you're blocking, you actually have to make your blade and the opponent's blade hit. If they hit, then your block succeeds. If they don't, like if you are jumping and they manage to hit you under your sword, or if they hit you on the side, in the back, even if you're blocking, you'll still take full damage. So it's very much about player skill. There is of course a lot of teamwork involved in this game. If you have a team with archers and knights, then you can do a lot of damage if everyone knows what to do and how to do it properly. And it's one of those games that there's not that many games out, but Chivalry is one of the games where you are working as a team and you're properly coordinating as a team, you will win hands down against a group that are uncoordinated, regardless of how skilled each individual is. Unless one person is ridiculously good. Because it is possible to take out an entire enemy team with one guy, but it is very unlikely. Now, there are objectives in this game. You can have objectives like burning villages, killing peasants, while one team will usually be trying to stop the other team doing that. There is a reasonable number of maps. There's quite enough, a few maps, plenty to really give you all that variety, so you don't feel like you're playing in the same place. However, if you do play, you will probably find that some maps are a lot more popular than others, and so if you're just joining random servers, there's a good chance you will be on the same map fairly frequently. Now, there are plenty of game modes. Team deathmatch is pretty simple, kill the other team. You have a few variations on that, one where it's just sort of last man standing, so you want to be surviving, one where you actually keep respawning, but you reduce your enemies' sort of reserves. Then there is the free-for-all, which is where everyone goes against everyone else, and that can become extremely hectic. And of course, if you're slightly laggy, it can be very problematic, and it isn't very fun. Thankfully, most of the time, the official servers are usually not too laggy. And there are servers that are all the time for most countries, so you should usually be able to find a way to log into somewhere that you're not going to get too much lag. And as you can see, you can also interrupt someone. If they're winding up an attack and you manage to connect with them, they will stop their attack. Just like that. And there you saw what's called an alternate attack. That is another big part of the game. In this game, it's all about tricking your opponents into thinking you're attacking, and then striking somewhere that they don't expect so you can get past their guard. The two ways to do this, generally speaking, apart from sneaking, are to feint, which is where you start to attack and then you press Q, which will stop your attack, at which point your opponent will probably block, and because they're blocking, as soon as they leave block, you have a very limited amount of time for blocking, and as soon as the block finishes, you will have about a second in order to strike a person before they're able to block again. So if you can time it right, then that is a way to get your opponents. The other way, of course, is using alternate attacks. There is an alternate version of every attack, which basically means you swing from the other side. So if your normal sideways attack is from your right, then your alternate will be on your left, etc. And that is actually very useful because of the way hitboxes work. If someone's holding a shield, if you can strafe around, you won't be able to attack on the side that their shield is not on. So you can actually avoid their shield. And that is something that takes a bit of practice to make sure you can use properly. And there you saw someone manage to hit me because they fainted, and I was wrong, unfortunately. Now, let's go to the knight. You can see the knight has a few extra things no one else has. For example, flails. I don't believe anyone else has a flail. They also have a shield, which I will not be using because it is very big and makes it very difficult to see. Now, this is the first time in this video I'm using a shield. Shields are a bit odd. With a shield, the advantage, of course, is that you keep your shield up, which means you don't have to time your blocks anymore. You can just keep a shield. Disadvantages, for one, you move more slowly. For two, you can't see. A good chunk of your screen is obscured by the shield. And one of the biggest things, you don't regenerate stamina when you're holding your shield like you're supposed to. And that's a big thing in this game, because when you run out of stamina regenerates pretty quickly, but when you run out, you get basically winded every time someone hits you, even if you block. And that basically leaves you wide open, and they can basically do a massive attack. See, this guy's got his shield up, he won't be regenerating stamina. So if I could repeatedly hit him, then if I didn't die, then I could repeatedly hit him and taken his stamina down, at which point he would have been too much at my mercy. Of course, I would have to time it such that my stamina remains high enough for me to actually attack. Now, you lose stamina by missing attacks and by blocking. So, when you do things like miss attacks on purpose, and you can do what's called a combo to swing and then do a second swing very quickly in an attempt to trick your opponent into blocking and then coming in for his quick second swing as soon as the block finishes. Of course, that means you've just lost stamina from the first swing, not connected. As you can see, we have a man at arms, just using a mace. Maces are, of course, better against heavy armor opponents. And as you can see, decapitation and bodily harm is fairly high in this game. It's not ridiculous, but it's... I hesitate to say it's realistic, because let's be honest, it's not. Very few games are realistic in that regard, but it works. If you hit someone in the head, their head will come off. And as you can see, playing with pretty much any weapon is viable against any enemy. It just takes the skill to use it, because every weapon has its own style. And as you can see, if you don't play that style well enough, then you will probably get killed. Now, in terms of graphics, the game, as you can see, is very high in terms of texture quality where it's important, but it's quite low in other places. For example, you can see the weapons and the character models are very high quality. They look brilliant. Here we are going through the man at arms next time we spot. The texture quality is very good on the characters, which is what you're most likely going to be focusing on for the majority of the time. Because of course, you've got to keep an eye on them because you're fighting, especially if you're blocking. You have to aim your block at the enemy's weapon if you want to block properly. So that's what you're going to be looking at the majority of the time. However, if you look at the floor or some of the walls, you can see the texture quality isn't as good, especially if you get up close. This isn't as much of an issue because you are looking at the other people and you're not concentrating. So because most of the pixels that are low or in your peripheral vision, it's not a problem. It would be nice if they were higher quality, but it isn't detrimental to the game in any way. In terms of sound, as I'm sure you know, sound plays a very big part in making combat feel real, feel visceral. And in this game, it really does a good job. When you block, you get a proper clang of steel. It makes you really feel the impact. When you strike someone, for example, when you stab someone, the sound assets aren't quite as good, but they do have the correct sort of nice thumping, slashing sound. They don't feel exactly realistic, but they feel powerful, which is really the most important aspect of this game. There is also a lot of, strangely enough, chivalry in Chivalry. It doesn't show up quite as much in these big team battles, however it does show up quite a lot in duels when it's just one person versus another. And this is, for example, if you're playing with someone, there's a good chance that they will bow. There's nothing in the game to support this, but people will crouch and bend over to bow to their opponents before fighting. And it astounds me that people can be so polite in this kind of game, especially when there is no communication tool other than the text chat, which is never used for this. It's just sort of something everyone does, which is really nice and is indicative of the really predominantly lovely community. I mean, the community is very good for the most part. Of course, every game has bad members of the community, but generally, this is a very good community. Now, you do see some things that are strange. For example, people in duels may just drop their weapons and walk up to you with their fists. And it's amazing that when you try this, the other person will usually just pull out their fists as well, and you can have a fist fight with no one will even think about pulling a sword in order to win the fight, which shows you. In this game, because there is no power for getting kills, you don't really get any power, and because everything's a side grade, and because the combat system is so fun with each of the weapons, people aren't that bothered about getting kills in order to increase their levels and get more weapons, because in this game, you level up by getting kills and wins. However, you unlock new weapons by getting kills with the previous weapon in that line. So if you want to get the next two-handed weapon, you only get points towards that by killing people with two-handed weapons. This is an alright system. I think it's quite well balanced, but it just shows the success of making the combat feel really entertaining with any weapon, that people are happy to have a fist fight for no reason and actually guaranteed they're not going to get any advancement towards the next weapon, and it's still extremely fun. I think this really shows the kind of game it is, and it is a very, very nice place to just have a bit of fun. I mean, generally, there are different servers for different things, so if you just want to go around shooting people without any politeness or anything, there are servers for that. You may not find them immediately, but they are about. Now, as I've said before, this game is very much about player skill. And I think the biggest display of this is in archery. There are various tools for archers, which allow you, especially in very big battles, to contribute more than just shooting people from long range. For example, you'll see me every now and then using what's called the arrow cam, which is right there, that. And that means the camera follows the arrow. If you shoot the arrow into the sky, you are able to scout out the enemy's surroundings. But what it's also useful for is gauging how far off an enemy attack you are. So if you just miss an enemy, you can follow the arrow, find out exactly how far off you were, and get a better idea of where you need to aim. And that is actually incredibly useful for training yourself to be able to judge the distance and where you should be aiming to actually hit an enemy. The game can be played in third person. There's actually 3 modes of first person. There's one directly behind, and there's one mode for over each of the shoulders, so you can go the left side or the right side. This does give a slight advantage because it means you can see behind you. However, the advantage isn't that great because you can hear footsteps quite loudly. So if an enemy is sneaking up behind you, there's a good chance you'll be able to hear it. Now, one thing that I know some people might be worried about, because the game does look quite nice. I mean, when you look at the sun shafts, it is a very nice looking game. It is cranked up to maximum settings on this recording. And as you can tell, I am recording and having it in maximum settings, and there is absolutely no lag at all. The game runs very, very nicely on systems that aren't very powerful. Even if you have quite a weak system, you should be able to run it without any trouble if you turn all the settings down. Of course, it won't look as nice, but that generally isn't too much of a problem. I played this on my old computer. I'm currently running quite a high-spec rig. However, my old computer was very low-spec, and that computer could also run Chivalry with no problems whatsoever. We couldn't run it without lag on maximum settings, but on minimum settings there was no lag at all. So if that's a concern for you and your machine isn't too high-spec, that should not be a problem at all. It is available on Steam. It is, I believe, £20 at the moment, 15 or £20, and it is, I would say, completely worth it. It does have a bit of a learning curve, and I recommend playing the tutorial because it is not only useful, it's also very funny. I hope you enjoy this overpowered review. I would give this game 8 out of 10, I'd say.